Hello, this is Dr. Kim Daugherty. With me is Dr. Stutz. Sorry, lost my train of thought. So today, at the end of the presentation, you should be able to describe how to use ExamSoft reports to pull data needed for the faculty teaching scorecards that we're going to talk about today. Be able to explain how faculty scorecards can be used to help faculty identify how their item writing compares to their peers. To discuss how report cards can be interpreted and how these report cards can be interpreted and used to develop faculty, and then how they're organized and presented actually to the faculty member. In the handout section on where you can do your chats, there is a handout PDF that we're going to encourage you to go ahead and kind of have open on your computer. We're going to pull that up here in a little bit and then kind of walk you through what a faculty member actually gets as a report card to kind of help you understand what we're working on. As we get started, one of the first things we wanted to do is just to kind of give you a brief overview of the college, just so you kind of have a general idea when we talk about some of the pieces today and why we feel like this faculty development is so important. We are a 3-year accelerated program. So our students are on a quarter system with an academic year that runs from July to June. So our first 2 didactic years are pretty much the didactic curriculum, and that runs, students do a 10-week set of 10 weeks of classes, a week of finals, and then have a 2-week break. And then our 3rd year is our experiential year, and students do 6-week block rotations, and they do 2 of those at a time and then have a week off. So it just kind of gives you a general idea of kind of how fast-paced our curriculum goes. And we are a private university, very career-focused. Everything in our university ends in a career, and everything that we do is very teaching-focused, and that's why these faculty developments are so important, because there is so much of an emphasis on teaching. For those that maybe aren't as familiar with the College of Pharmacy, we are divided into 2 departments. We have a clinical and administrative science department, which is the department that Dr. Stutz chairs, and that has about 30 or so faculty in it. And then we have a pharmaceutical science department as well, and that has about 11 faculty. So the pharmaceutical science faculty have a lot heavier in-class teaching load. Our clinical department is slightly larger because most of those faculty teach both in the classroom but mainly out in the experiential setting during the 3rd year. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Stutz, who's going to kind of walk you through the report cards a little bit, and I'll come back here in a few minutes.
Thanks, Kim. Hi, so this is Misty Stutz, and like she mentioned, I am the chair of the Clinical and Administrative Science Department at Sullivan. So just to get us started on a little bit of background of why we actually needed to come up with some faculty development around teaching. So I wanted to give you a little bit of background about myself. So I actually entered academia in a very non-traditional route. I started with the college in 2008, but all of my background was in industry. And so one of the first things that I had a really difficult time wrapping my head around was the evaluation process. So I was used to an evaluation where you had performance metrics and you had to meet these key performance metrics in order to get a raise or to be promoted to additional level, where as in academia, as you know, it's much more about reflection and kind of that wordy, untouchable kind of thing. And so, you know, when I took over as department chair in 2013, I recognized that not only did my faculty have this need for development, but for myself, I needed some more objective measures to evaluate them. I didn't have a long history in academia, so I needed a way that I could say, you know, it's not just about how I feel about you or how I think you teach, but actually some objective measures that said that you were actually excellent in the classroom. So 45% of our promotion criteria is excellence in teaching, so you will not get promoted if you're a poor teacher. We are, like Kim mentioned, a relatively new College of Pharmacy, and so the majority of faculty that we have hired have come straight out of residency, and so they are very eager to have feedback on their performance. Prior to 2014, our annual evaluation was based on basically a self-evaluation of the faculty member and then student survey data, and that was pretty much all that there was. So As I came on board as the chair, I said, how can there be a way to add more objective data to our mix? So the first thing I did was to do a literature search on what would be considered assessment of teaching excellence. And my colleague from Kentucky, she wrote this great paper about some ways that you can have assessments of teaching excellence. The first is one I think that we all recognize, and that's the data that we have from our students and our alumni with student surveys, and that we were currently doing. We did try to better our student survey so that we could have more hone in on some of the skills that we were really looking for and try to make it less of a popularity contest, because that's always been a complaint, I think, from faculty, is that they feel that if a student doesn't like them, they're not going to rate them very high. And so no faculty member wants to have their sole evaluation come from student data solely. So a second method of assessment of teaching excellence would be data from peers. And so we did incorporate a classroom observation, both from a chair and from a peer, and then review of materials. So if you created cases, and then assessments. And so item writing falls into this assessment review, and that's what we're going to be spending most of our time on today. The self-assessment and reflection, so those are still really important. I mean, you can look at those both with how students perform on your individual assessments, as how they do also on benchmark exams. So the data that comes from these can be somewhat subjective, but also objective as well. So after we got the evaluation to the point where it was an evaluation from peers, so I would ask for not only classroom observation, but from peers, if you coordinated a course, that they would provide feedback on your coordination. Also, I would ask for peer feedback from the clinical site on their experiential teaching. And then we got to the point where I really wanted something that would hone in on both the subjective from the students and peers, as well as the objective data that I will get from ExamSoft. And so we created this faculty teaching scorecard to help a faculty member actually see things in writing about how they do, especially in comparison with their peers. So this is what it looks like. So I just wanted to show you this. This is the evaluation from students of that faculty's teaching. And so we usually evaluate a student at least once, our faculty member at least once a year. And then this report card shows them how they compare their individual average and then compares it to all faculty averages. And so then they get to see how they compare to the faculty member. I did a compilation of all faculty averages, both from the PS and the CAS department, and then created different standard deviations so that faculty could see if they were above one standard deviation or below one standard deviation. And in this case, there was a couple that were below 2 standard deviations. And this really helped me from a chair perspective. Sometimes when a faculty member would come in and they would say, well, you know, 80% of the class think that I'm an effective teacher, but yet I would have seen all of the faculty evaluations and know that the average for all faculty was over 90%. And so an 80% was actually not a good score, but they don't know that because they don't see all the data. So this was one way to show them that data. If you coordinate a course, we also provide you the information regarding your course and how it compares to other courses. And this is that course ranking. So you can see where your course fits in, also with a standard deviation mix. And this is the item writing statistics, and we're going to go into this in detail further, so I'll kind of skip through this. But shows you where your items fall as far as the difficulty level, the quality of the item, and then an analysis of that item. And then we go into the experiential teaching, and we do an aggregate report, and then also a ranking with your peers. So in this case, the faculty members scored 3rd with a 3.96 out of 4 Likert scale out of the 19 practicing faculty. And then also the educator bias to show how you grade your experiential students in comparison with your peers. And then this report card, we utilize eValue for our management system on that end, so you can get the scorecard from eValue. Okay, so, oops, sorry. The question was, after I had done the scorecard for a couple years and we had had a lot more input into the evaluation process, I wanted to know if this was actually working. So this is the AACP faculty survey that we have performed actually annually since I've been the chair. So I came on in 2013, and at that time I had about 17% of overall faculty, this is both departments, that did not feel that the performance feedback they received was effective. So as you can see, 2014, 15, and 16, it has improved, and so it's about 5% of faculty, which I consider to be a pretty good success, especially since the national average is at 14. Oops, sorry.
So now that we've kind of given you a general idea of what goes into those report cards, we want to move now into where that ExamSoft data comes from. So we wanted just to kind of start first with just some general information about how we use ExamSoft and how we interpret some of that data out of ExamSoft to kind of set the stage then for why the data is used the way it is in the report card. So all of our quizzes, most of our quizzes, and all of our examinations in the didactic part of our curriculum are all done in ExamSoft. And all faculty members are required to tag their questions with our programmatic outcome, a curriculum topic that's given to us by our accreditor, the faculty's name so that we know who wrote the question, and then a Bloom's taxonomy. That's pretty much monitored by the course coordinator. It's their job to ensure that all of those items are tagged appropriately. My office does go through at the end of the quarter and just kind of skims the question sets just to make sure that at least the programmatic outcome and curriculum topics are there, because we use those for programmatic assessment purposes. But the course coordinators usually do a pretty good job of assuring that all of that's there. We also use the item analysis that comes out of ExamSoft after each examination, not so much for quizzes, but for the most part for examinations, to determine if questions should be rescored. So they're used at the exam level before they're ever rolled up into any type of report card. And we use the exam average for that. We look at the low and high exam average, and we'll show you kind of what that looks like here in a minute. The point by serials and the difficulty index to kind of help us determine that. But then as you'll see as we move on, this item analysis data can also be used to help faculty develop their exam writing skills. And I think most of us are familiar with that at a question writing level, but we're going to show you how you can actually roll that up and use it at a broader level as opposed to just each individual question. Just to make sure that we're kind of all on the same page with some definitions and how we use those definitions here at the college. As a reminder, the difficulty index ranges basically from, I think of it as a percentage, so from 0 to 100%. And these are definitions taken straight out of ExamSoft, that the difficulty index measures the proportion of exam takers who answer an item correctly. So the higher that number is, the greater portion of the exam takers got it right. The lower that value, the less people that got it right. So I think a lot of times we equate that with if more people got it right, it's probably an easier question as opposed to the less people that got it right, the more difficult of a question for the most part. One thing to keep in mind, sometimes in the medical field, particularly in colleges of pharmacy, there may be times we want that higher level to get it right because it is a concept that is an extremely basic concept, or it's a life or death concept. So just because we say it's easy versus hard isn't necessarily a bad thing. So don't think about it that way, but kind of easier to wrap your head around that. So we use this difficulty index to kind of get a brief idea when you're looking at a 50-question exam, which questions potentially should be rescored. And so we typically set, just arbitrarily, anything less than or equal to 60%. Most of the coordinators are going to take a look at to say, maybe I need to rescore it. Doesn't mean it has to be, but it is the kind of starting point for that review. The next piece that they look at is the point by serial. And the point by serial ranges from -1 to 1, and it measures the correlation between an exam taker's response and how they performed on the exam. So the higher that point by serial is, the more likely it is that those that did well on the exam also got the question right, which is really what we're after. If that score is low or even negative, then what that'll tell you is that means that your students who didn't do well on the exam got that question right. And so 9 times more so than those that did well. And that typically tells you that they got it right more due to guessing or being a good test taker than they were in knowing the concept. So when we think about rescoring here at Sullivan, anything that's a 0.3 and up is considered a very good item. There's really not a reason to rescore it unless the difficulty index is below 30%. And the reason for that is we feel like if the difficulty index is below 30%, then chances are it's a concept that the students just did not get, whether it's because of the way we asked the question, maybe it's the way we taught it, but something just isn't right. And that really, even if the question's good, conceptually they didn't get that. At a 0.2 to a 0.29, that's a reasonably good question. With some tweaking, it could probably be a great question. And those are questions that are reviewed for rescoring. And when we talk about rescoring, we're talking about either giving full credit for the question because maybe there's not another great answer to give, or maybe there was something confusing in the question. Or 9 times out of 10, what we find is that there's maybe 2 answers that could be correct, and you can see why the students might select A and C versus just A if that was the correct answer. Anything less than 0.2 is considered a poor question, and 9 times out of 10 is rescored or full credit is given. The faculty usually has to do some pretty fast talking to the department chairs to get to keep a question, then that's less than 0.2. So kind of keep those items in mind and as Misty gets into kind of how she uses this data at a rolled up level for the report cards.
Okay, so I first want to show you what I consider our typical performance on an exam. So this was an exam that was given this summer, the average of an 82, low score 51, high score 98. Our average on most exams is probably somewhere between 80 to 84%. We always have a student that scores 98 to 100% on an exam. Usually there's somebody that fails, maybe not at a 51, but you know, that's typical. And if you look at that curve, it looks like a pretty nice bell curve. So just keep this in mind for the performance on an exam, because that's going to show you how our faculty members actually write items. So on this one, this is how the difficulty level falls for our faculty. This is the faculty average. So 39% of all questions have a difficulty level of 0.9 or greater. So that means that 90% of the class will get these questions correct. Then 80 to 90, 19% of the questions fall in that range, 13 in the 70 to 80 range, and then 10 in the 60 to 70 range, and then it goes down. And I just put all of less than 50 together, but it would continue to go down if I had taken it out all the way. So the majority of the questions, most of the students get correct, and then kind of goes down. So then when you look at how these questions score, so you know, Kim mentioned that we usually try to throw out those with point Biserials of less than 2. The exception probably to that is those really easy questions that have that difficulty index at 0.9 or above, because it's very, very difficult to write an easy lower level question. If it's a recall question, then it's very difficult for it to have a good point Biserial. So typically those, as well as the really difficult questions, our faculty members find it much more difficult to write good questions. But as you can see, the other ones fall pretty much in that same range. So most of the questions, you know, 79, 80% of the questions are good questions. So then what I could do with this, if you take those faculty averages, and then, which are in blue, and then you compare them to like an individual faculty member, you can look to see, is that faculty member writing more difficult questions or easier questions than their peers. So in this case, this would be considered a hard item writer. So if you notice, they're in the 0.9 and 0.8 and above, their questions actually have less percentage of questions that fall in that range, and they have more that fall in the 0.6 and the 0.5. So they write harder questions. So what do I do with that as a faculty, or as a chair, department chair? Well, I had a situation where a course coordinator gave an exam, and the students performed. I had about 20% of the class that failed the exam. And so what we do is at the end of the exam, the course coordinator will come with me and we'll review the exam together. And so my very first question is, what do you think happened? And typically, the first thing that a faculty thinks of is students just didn't study. Well, not always. And so what we did is we took a look at the items. The items actually performed really well. And so the next thing we usually do is look for poor items so that we can rescore them, you know, either giving full credit or making them bonus questions. But in this case, all of them were really high-scoring questions. They were just really, really difficult. And when I looked at who the item writer was for that exam, it made perfect sense. Their faculty scorecard looked something like this. So rather than giving back individual questions, we actually just moved the curve up to make it more like our average exam would score. So I think we actually moved it up 10 percentage points, which gave it a bell curve that was still the same. We didn't change the curve, we just moved it to the right a little bit. This would be an example of an easy item writer, which I try to identify just as much because we have a rigorous program. We don't want our students to always just all get A's. They need to fall, somewhat within that average. Now, some courses do lend themselves to easier item writing, but in general, I'm looking to see if there's an item writer that writes too easy of a question. This is an example of an item writer that writes good questions across all the difficulty levels. And I don't see this very frequently. So this would probably be my best item writer at the college. As you can tell, their questions perform better than their peers on all the categories except the minus 50. So I'm very happy with this item writer. This also helps me with the mentoring piece as well. So this item writer can help those faculty that aren't quite as good at item writing. This would be an example of a poor item writer across all difficulty levels. And it helps me to identify those folks that actually need help in the faculty area of item writing. And this one could be kind of a mix. And I would say that most faculty fall in this one where they can write, maybe they write really good hard questions, but not so good easy questions, or vice versa. So this is kind of a mix. So this would be an example of some of the feedback that I might give you if you were a faculty member. I would tell you your total number of questions, and then I would say, it appears you're still writing more difficult items than your peers, and they're not performing as well. So item writing should be on your faculty development plan for this year. And so I give the scorecards, and then we meet for their annual evaluation, and we review what their development plan will be for the year. And some of it is based then off of this information. Okay, so you're probably wondering where and did you get this data? Well, let me show you how I got this in ExamSoft. So if you go under the question tab from the main page on ExamSoft, and then you put in the creator of the question. So there's a tab down, and we do mark, like Kim mentioned earlier, we do mark the creator of the question. So all of our questions are tagged with the creator. And then you need to, and I didn't mention, but you need to go under advanced search to find this information. Then you'll go over to the right-hand side and determine what time frame you want to use. So I did this for calendar year 2016, and so I just put in the dates that I wanted. Then if you go to it'll list all the questions that were written. If you go to the bottom, it gives you the overall results, and that would be the total number of items written in that time frame. Then you can narrow it down by difficulty level. So in this case, I said that it had to be greater than a 0.8 but less than a 0.9. And there were 55 results that were in that category. And then I added the component of what I wanted the point Biserial to be. So in this case, I said I wanted it to be greater than 0.2, which is kind of our minimum. And there were 51 results out of that. So for this faculty member, 20% of the total items that they wrote range in the 80 to 90 or 0.8 to 0.9 difficulty level. And then 93% of those questions had a greater than 0.2 point Biserial. And then I was able to create the charts that you saw.
So just like anything else, there's always some limitations that can be thought of or that come up when doing these kind of report cards or data mining. So we wanted to go over those real briefly. One that we've not listed here would be just the time that's involved in putting these together. We do want to make sure that, I'm sure somebody's going to ask that question, but it does take some time to pull all of that data individually and put it together. But it is very worthwhile data as a faculty member. Another limitation just are the questions tagged appropriately. We do have several adjunct faculty or maybe some of our residents that write questions, and sometimes, let's say I'm mentoring that adjunct or I'm mentoring that resident, I may not have them enter their own questions. I may enter them, and if that's the case, then I usually tag them with my name as opposed to that faculty member's name. So there could be some questions in there that aren't necessarily yours. However, the hope would be if you're mentoring that person, you've looked at the questions, which may or may not always be true. Some of the faculty also have a limited number of questions. Maybe you teach most of your coursework in a class that doesn't do multiple choice type exams, or you do an elective or something along those lines that maybe doesn't have as much ExamSoft data. The other issue is that the report cards don't take into account things that aren't analyzed with a point biserial or a difficulty index. That would be things like fill in the blank questions, essays, that kind of thing. We don't have many exams in most of our required courses that have those kind of questions. Those come more in maybe the quizzes or things of that nature. Most of our larger summative assessments are mainly multiple choice. The other piece right now is that when you pull those reports, there's not a way to pull them and tell it you only want exams or you only want quizzes. It is, so the data that is being pulled is a mix of summative and formative assessments. And those of us that have written questions for a long time know that sometimes I might write different types of questions or different, I might write easier questions or harder questions depending on whether I'm writing maybe a more formative type assessment than a summative assessment. But those are all things that come out when the department chair goes over that data. They can have some of those conversations if a faculty member truly felt like the data that was being pulled wasn't representative of their writing style. Some future things that we're looking to do with these report cards. Right now, you'll notice that I mentioned that we tagged a Bloom's taxonomy, but that data is not shown on the report cards. The reason for that is when we first started using ExamSoft, we were using the 6 levels of Bloom's taxonomy, but we really felt like for those that use Bloom's taxonomy, that there wasn't a great distinction a lot of times in all 6 of the levels. So we felt like a lot of that data wasn't probably real clean. We just recently have decided to go to a 3-level Bloom's taxonomy, and we feel like we'll get some better data that way. So right now we're not using Bloom's for either our students or the faculty, but we do plan on adding that here in the future. The other piece that we're moving to, as Misty alluded to right now, she does these report cards, the faculty see them, and then it's just more of a discussion. But there's not really a lot of self-assessment that goes along with it. In the future, what will happen is the faculty will get these in enough time to be able to add this to their self-evaluation. So when it comes to her, before they even meet, the faculty will have kind of come up with their thoughts and their plans, and then they can kind of compare answers, I guess, as far as that goes. So we know we've kind of presented a lot of data, and I'm sure there's a lot of questions. So we've deliberately decided not to talk a whole lot. We wanted to give people time to ask questions, and then we'll kind of turn that over right now. Questions?
Wonderful. Thank you both so much. A great presentation. I'm going to go ahead and open up the floor for a Q&A session at this point. So if you have questions for the presenters, now is the time to type them into the questions area of the GoToWebinar control panel, which is on the right-hand side of your screen. Ladies, we already have a couple of questions, so I'm going to go ahead and jump right in if that's okay.
That sounds great.
Perfect. The first question that we got was, could you repeat the first step when you go to the questions tab? And that step-by-step process you went through.
Yep. So you go to click on the question, and then after you click on question, there's an advanced search button. So click on advanced search, and that'll bring you up to this screen that you see. And then you can type in the creator, the time frame, which is what we currently are using to pull the report card.
Great, thank you. Next question is, we have administrative staff entering in exam questions. How can we tag the creator field with a different person? It autofills whomever is logged in.
Is that like the API student that we have?
I think the way that we do this, the faculty are actually categories, aren't they?
Yes, they are.
We actually have the faculty in as categories. So you could do it as a creator, which is the way she's pulled it here, or you could list your faculty as a category. That would be another way that.
Yeah, I was just going to say most clients who are reporting on item author or creator, they're really just creating a tag or a category for that faculty member or author.
Yeah, that would be another way to pull that data as well.
Okay, next question is, why did you decide to use point by serial instead of discrimination score?
Great question. The reason I think was just because that's what we use to rescore the exams. So if you're going to tell a fact, so we use that difficulty index and the point by serial as a combination to rescore exams. So that's what we were using for that, it just made sense to carry that forward because that's what the faculty are used to hearing and seeing. So rather than teaching them a different piece to go along with it, we just carried on what we already do. I don't know if that makes sense, but.
Great. Next question is, how often are faculty evaluated with your scorecard?
It's annually, so once a year.
Okay. Next question is, can you describe your rescoring process? Do you reduce the number of questions, award points across the board, etc.?
That very much is a course coordinator department chair decision depending on the class. So it does vary. I've seen things from, we try to avoid the just throwing out altogether. So taking an exam from 50 questions and now making it 49. The reason for that is that seems to penalize, that obviously penalizes students that got the answer right because now it's out of 49 questions instead of 50. So that is one that we try not to use. Typically, either just full credit is given across the board. For the question, multiple answers are accepted, which is usually the most common approach. Every so often a faculty member will turn it into a bonus question, but even that's kind of discouraged. We try to use mainly just the full credit or multiple answers. And I'd say even full credit's pretty rare unless it's one of those less than 30% kind of items. Typically what we find is there's most of our faculty write 4 answer multiple choice, so typically there's 2 answers for most of them. But a lot of that very depends on the conversation with the department chair.
Okay, next question. We use a question bank. My new faculty are encouraged to write new questions, but often don't. One new faculty member is teaching a course where the average score on exams was 85% previously, but when taught this year, the average exam grade was higher than 94%. Using previous questions, so wondering if you think the test bank is compromised or faculty is releasing questions on study guides providing to students. Do you guys have any input on what that could be?
Sounds like it could be a multitude of things. So clearly, if the students had access to those questions from previous years, because they were reused from that year, then that could be a reason.
Yeah, that's probably, I would say it's probably either A, they have access to the questions, just because we all know students have access to questions, or B, the faculty have used it either as a study guide or it maybe as examples or something along those lines. That's quite common. We typically tell our faculty that it's fine if you want to use the general concepts from a previous set of questions, but we encourage them to change up their distractors or change it from a male to a female. I mean, anything that would change the answers up a little bit, because 9 times out of 10, the students have the questions. We typically tell them just assume they have them.
So another thing that we do with the faculty is if they teach a topic and they have to come up with, let's say, 10 items for that exam, they're to look at how that item performed last year, especially if they taught the topic last year, and they can use the items that performed well, but they have to come up with at least 20% new items so that I never have the exact same exam. And like Kim mentioned, if you change a distractor or two, that will actually help to make it so that they're not exactly the same questions. And I do feel like item writing is a really important thing that a new faculty member needs to learn how to do. And we encourage it. We try to offer sessions on faculty development, as well as have them participate in some item writing workshops and that kind of thing.
But I do think that is definitely one nice thing about ExamSoft is that you can if you do use a test bank like that, that you can monitor that kind of thing, and you do have to wonder when an exam jumps that much. You know, a couple of percentage points, yes, you would expect, but yeah, 10% would tell me that the questions have leaked out somehow. Unfortunately, I'd like to tell you that the faculty member is an incredible teacher, but.
Okay, next question. What about student evaluation response rates when evaluating faculty?
That's a great question. So when I first became department chair, our student response rate was horrible, and so it was very difficult to tell a faculty member that they were being evaluated on a 30% response rate. So we actually now provide an incentive to the class we do a couple of different things. We provide an incentive. So if we get a response rate greater than 90%, then we give a 1% bonus to their hardest class. We also do allow time for surveys in class, and then we limited the number of surveys to prevent survey overburden for the students by trying to identify faculty are evaluated just once a year in their major topic area. Another thing that we do as well is we try to stagger our surveys. So if I have a lecture that comes in and they teach in the first part of the quarter, I'll go ahead and release that survey then rather than waiting until the end of the quarter, just so that I can get data that's fresh on the student's mind. So now we do have a response rate that's always over 90%.
That's great. Next question is, do you keep a tally of how many questions are nullified, and is that used as a negative score on the scorecard?
Currently I don't, but that's actually a great idea. It would be very interesting to see how many of your items had to be rescored or thrown out, or, you know.
Okay, and last question
something to
Sorry, guys, go ahead.
Something to add to the future list.
For sure. Last question that we've got is, who compiles this data for the faculty evaluation?
So that's a great question. So I do have some administrative help to help me do this, but I do spend quite a bit of time putting the scorecards together. But yeah, I get the administrators help me because they actually do the student survey data, and so they compile it in a form that I can present it to the faculty, and then I put it all together. So
yeah, the longest part of it is pulling the data from ExamSoft. We use SurveyMonkey for the faculty for the evaluation, the course and faculty evaluation part, so that's a little quicker.
It's easy to pull the data, it just takes a while.
Yeah. And the faculty scorecard is done in PowerPoint. I don't know if you could notice that as we were flipping through the PDF, but that's done in PowerPoint.
Okay, thank you so much, ladies. We really appreciate the presentation. Thank you all so much for being here as well. We know it's a busy time of year, so we appreciate your attendance and taking time to be here. Quick reminder, as you close out of the GoToWebinar control panel, you will get a pop-up on your screen with a quick survey. It's just 5 questions long. We would really appreciate the feedback so that we can continue to provide relevant content at all of these webinars. Also, this webinar has been recorded, so check your inbox here in the next 24 to 48 hours. We should have an email for you with a link to the recording as well as a copy of the PDF version of the slide deck. If you have any questions, you can reach ExamSoft at info@examsoft.com. Thank you so much for your attendance again this afternoon, and thank you to our presenters. Everybody have a great afternoon.
Thanks.